Hello, I'm Dr. Jeffrey Thibert, Assistant Director of National Fellowships at the Center for Undergraduate Scholarly Engagement, or CUSE, at the University of Notre Dame. And this is an application workshop on the Fulbright U.S. Student Program Study Research Grant. Now, this is designed for people who have been through the screening application process at the University of Notre Dame. So the idea here is that we won't be giving general information about the Fulbright, and we won't be talking quite as much about the sort of timeline of the application process, because that's information that has been covered in videos already, or information that you will receive by email once you've gone through the screening application process, if you haven't already. If you have no idea what I'm talking about when I say screening application, or when I talk about having general information about the Fulbright, if you don't even know what the Fulbright is, I would suggest that you go to the following website here on the screen, fellows.nd.edu, and that's plural, fellows.nd.edu. Go to the fellowships menu and go to Fulbright. If you go here, you will find a set of basic information about the Fulbright. You will find links to previous online information sessions and some workshops related to the Fulbright. You'll find information about upcoming deadlines, and you will be able to download the screening application information here at the bottom of the page. The idea is that you will submit the screening application, you will have a meeting with one of our Fulbright program administrators here, and then you will receive further information, including a timeline and the application advice package, which we will be going over in more detail in just a couple of minutes. So this should be your first step if you haven't done this already. Once you've done all of this, once you've viewed the information session and the screening application session, then you'll be in a good place to view this workshop, the application advice workshop, because this is where we'll get into the application itself in a little bit more detail. So make sure to visit this website if you haven't yet, fellows.nd.edu, and you'll want to navigate to the Fulbright page. Now, with that being said, let's talk about the application. And where I'm going to start is with some application advice based on the application advice document that you may have received already, or that you will receive when you go through the screening application process. I brought it up here on the screen. You're, of course, welcome to pause this at any point and review this in more detail. If you have questions as you're going through this, you can always contact us at any time using the email address fellows, which is plural, fellows@nd.edu. You can contact us there with questions, and we will get back to you about that. So now, going through the advice document here, you'll note the first section says before you begin. And what we'll do actually is go through this advice document, cover some basics, and then at the end we'll go over a few successful applications from past years so that you can get a sense of what these look like. Now, before you begin, I highly recommend that you view the information at these websites if you haven't already. The first one gives you a brief summary of the major purposes of the Fulbright program. Now, this is important because as you're applying for the Fulbright, you'll want to make sure that you're keeping in mind what the Fulbright is about fundamentally, and this page describes that pretty well. Fundamentally, the Fulbright is a way to promote mutual understanding between the U.S. and other countries through educational exchange. So the project you're proposing is, of course, very important, but it is important even more so that you incorporate some kind of civic engagement into your plan. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but this is not just research. It's not just study. There is also a civic engagement component, and your application will be evaluated on that basis. They'll be looking for people who not only have compelling and feasible project proposals, but also people who seem to have the potential to be effective cultural ambassadors of the United States abroad. The second page here is a link to the Fulbright country summaries, and these are important because you want to be sure that you fit the profile for the country that you are planning to apply to. Different countries have different preferences, and you'll want to be sure to review the country summary information to see if, for instance, they are particularly seeking projects in certain fields of study. If they are really looking for graduate students as opposed to graduating seniors. The country summary pages will have all this kind of information, and all things being equal, of course, it would be best to apply to a country where you meet all of the preferences. Now, they usually are just described as preferences, and it is possible to overcome those with a particularly strong project idea, but you should take those preferences seriously because you will be at a disadvantage relative to other applicants who meet those preferences if you don't meet them. So I highly encourage you to review the country summaries. And if it turns out you don't meet the preferences, you might take a look at other countries in the region or other countries that might interest you to see if you might be a better fit for their profile. Now, the third item here is the Fulbright applicants section of the website, and this is maybe your most helpful resource as you're working on the application. Much of what we talk about in this session is based on information that is in this applicants section, and they don't want this to be a trick. The application is not meant to be tricky. They're pretty clear about telling you what they want to see in the application, what kind of questions they want you to address in the statement of grant purpose, what kind of stuff they want you to talk about in the personal statement. So it's important to read through all of this information carefully now, if you haven't yet, really before you begin working on the application. You will get a better sense of what they want from an affiliation in a host country. You will get a better sense of what they want in the statement of grant purpose. You will get a better sense of what they want in a letter of recommendation, which will help you determine whom you should be asking for these letters. So I think you have to go through and read this before you proceed any further if you haven't yet. So once you've done all this before you really formally begin the application, then we should talk about things you should do as you're preparing for the application. Now, so this would be, first you're getting some general information from these websites, and you might go back and consult these sites as you're working on the application. But now we're talking about things you can do, questions you should be asking yourself before you start writing. And I think this is useful because ultimately, if you don't have compelling answers to all of these questions, it will be difficult to write a successful Fulbright study research grant application. Now you note that I referenced 2 application tips sections here. One thing to note is that there's a separate section if you're applying in the arts. And you can, of course, apply for a Fulbright program in the arts. And typically these projects involve sort of apprenticing with someone in a particular artistic field or conducting a certain art project. Those proposals are slightly different mainly in that they require you to also submit a portfolio. And we won't be talking as much about that in this session, but there's information about the portfolio on this website here, and we can, of course, share information about the portfolio with you if you have questions. But as you're reading these sites, here are some things you should be keeping in mind. And again, I would take these things into account before you really start working on the application in earnest. First, as I was saying earlier, you should meet all of the host country's preferences. You should make sure that your project does as well. If they say that you're discouraged from submitting projects on particularly sensitive topics, that's something to take seriously. And you might want to consider, you might talk with people who have worked in the region, people who you know in the region, in the country, to see if they have an idea about how your proposal might be received, for instance, by people in the government, because in the final analysis, it will be people affiliated in the country, potentially diplomats, government officials, other people like that, who will be making the decision about whether to bring you there. So it's important that you make sure that you meet the country's preferences. Now, second, you must make sure that your project is compelling. And really, the two key words to keep in mind here are compelling and feasible. The entire application really is about convincing the reviewers that your proposal is compelling and feasible. So what does compelling mean? Well, compelling means that your project has to be done, that it's a project of high interest not only to the field of study, but also to the host country. So note some of the questions that come into play here. Who will you be working with? What do you propose to do? Those are, of course, fairly standard. But then what is innovative about the research? What is important or significant about the project? Will the project contribute to cultural exchange and mutual understanding? These are all parts of showing that your project is compelling. So I would go through, before you start writing anything, and write out answers to all of these questions. It will be useful because you can essentially then use this material in your statement of grant purpose, but they will be expecting your application to address these questions, and you will most likely include these answers in the statement of grant purpose. So take these questions very seriously. If you can't answer these questions, then that's a sign that you may want to do some additional thinking about your proposal. You may want to consult with your faculty mentors. You may want to consult with CUSE about ways to make your project more compelling, ways to come up with these kinds of answers. You'll see that there are some additional questions here. Now, the third point here is that your project must be feasible. This means that you must have strong answers to these kinds of questions. Now, feasibility means, in part, is the project realistic? So, are there resources in the host country to support the project? Is the project going to fit with the country culturally and politically? Do you have a connection with a potential advisor there? This would be your affiliation. Do you have the required background to carry it out? So it's partially, is the project realistic? It's also, is it feasible that you can carry out the project? This is why it says, do you have the requisite background? Do you have sufficient language skills? They want to make sure that you are capable of carrying out the project. Now, I will say that for undergraduates proposing to do research projects abroad, it can sometimes be more difficult to demonstrate feasibility. You might be able to explain that your project is very compelling, give very clear reasons why it needs to be done, how it's going to benefit the host country, but also you will need to be able to show that you can do it. And you may be competing against, advanced graduate students who are proposing to do, say, dissertation research on a Fulbright, who may have a lot of experience with certain methods. They may have already done a pilot study. So typically, when demonstrating feasibility, it's usually best if you can connect the project to something you've done before. And we'll see as we look at some examples, ways that people have done this. But, for instance, have you carried out a certain project at Notre Dame that you would then be able to extend on a Fulbright? So maybe you did, and I guess this wouldn't be at Notre Dame, it would be through Notre Dame, but have you done summer research in a country that you would then want to go back and expand on in that country for an extended period of time? Have you conducted a study at Notre Dame that you would then want to kind of translate into a new context in another country? The point is that you really need to be able to convince them that you are qualified to do this, that you have the necessary skills. And of course, your recommenders will need to do this as well. And it's also useful if the people writing your letters of affiliation can confirm that they think you will be successful in doing your project. If there's uncertainty about this, you are probably unlikely to get the grant in the end, because this is a very independent kind of thing, and they will essentially give you the grant, and then you are off to the country, and beyond an orientation at the beginning and occasional reports you have to file, nobody from Fulbright will necessarily be watching you. You'll have your affiliate, your advisor, your mentor in the country, but you're basically accountable for yourself. And so they really want to be sure that if they give you the grant, you're going to be able to go there and do what you say you're going to do. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that you can't be flexible, that you can't be aware that things could change once you get on the ground. That's fine. But they need to be convinced that this is well thought out and that you are qualified to carry this out. So for instance, if you're proposing to do a large-scale survey, but you've had limited experience or no experience with survey methodologies, and maybe you don't even mention needing to go through a kind of human subjects approval through an institutional review board to get ethical clearance for the project, that would be a problem. If you're proposing to do interviews, same thing. It will be very useful if you can say that you've done interviews before and that you've analyzed interviews before. They're going to want to know that you're really qualified to do what you're saying. The fourth point here is about the affiliation. And in pretty much all cases with a research grant, you need to have a solid affiliate in the country. It's usually with someone at a university, a lab, a library, a non-governmental organization. But basically, if you are claiming to need certain resources, or you are claiming that you're going to be working with certain people, it's very helpful to have letters of affiliation from those people confirming that their willingness to work with you, and also ideally commenting on their assessment of your ability to carry out the project. And we'll see some examples of some really strong letters of affiliation when we look at the samples. But this is a crucial part of the application, and without a strong affiliation, it's usually difficult to move forward in the process. You can have multiple affiliates. You could have 5 letters of affiliation if that's what you needed. So if you are claiming that you need access to certain things, you need certain resources, it's ideal if someone in the country can confirm that you'll be able to get those resources, that they will advise you, that they will mentor you. Now, another point is that you'll need 3 excellent references. Now, what these referees will be doing is attesting to your ability to carry out your proposed project. They too will be commenting on how compelling your project is and how feasible it is. While it's not unhelpful to have a letter that just focuses on your ability to be a cultural ambassador, what they're really most looking for here are people who can attest to your ability to carry out the project. Now, if you have two really strong letters that do that, and a third letter that maybe can say more about how you'd function as a cultural ambassador, that might be okay. But the main thing you need the letters to do is, again, attest to your ability to carry out the proposed project. The stronger the letters, the more the letters can confirm that you have certain qualifications, the more the letters can confirm that your project is very important, because you won't necessarily have people reviewing your application who are in your field of study. The more the letters can do this, the better of a chance you'll have. Now, I do want to point out that some people will be applying just for study grants, and the requirements are a little bit different for the study grants in that you're not typically proposing a full project, but many of these things will still be relevant because you're essentially needing to convince them that your plan of study is compelling and feasible, that there's a really good reason why you need to do this study. It's usually helpful if you can get a letter of affiliation from someone in the program there who will confirm that they will work with you. And it's not necessary always, but it's usually helpful. And again, the references have to attest to your ability to carry out your plan of study, that you will be an excellent student, that this is a kind of a worthwhile program for you to pursue. So while much of the advice here is targeted toward a more research-oriented grant, it's not hard to see how it applies to a study grant as well. Now, let's talk about the application. A key element of the application is the abstract. And this should be a summary of the key points from your statement of grant purpose. I have heard that, in fact, reviewers have said that sometimes they won't read the rest of the application if the abstract isn't compelling. So make sure that the abstract is very clear about what you're proposing to do and ideally why it's important. You will also fill out a section on your plans for engagement while in the host country, and this should be compelling as well. What are you planning to do beyond the bounds of your project to engage with the culture in the host country? We have a plane flying by. Sorry, I apologize for that. So don't take this abstract lightly. You might not, of course, complete it until the end. That would make sense. But make sure that it's a strong statement about what you're proposing to do and why it's worthwhile. You want to hook them with this. This will really be the first substantial thing they read in the application. So you want them to be impressed right from the start. Now, the statement of grant purpose is probably the heart of the application. It's 2 pages, single-spaced, 1-inch margin, 12 Times New Roman, 12-point font. So this is not a ton of writing here. You have to fit everything into 2 pages. You cannot go over. Now, what you're going to need to do in this is address all of those questions from above regarding how your project is compelling and feasible. So again, compelling means that the project needs to be done, both in terms of its importance to the field of study and its importance to the host country. You want to try to convince them that this is something that the host country would want to fund, that it's something that's really going to benefit them, because again, in the end, they are deciding whether to bring you there. And if they're not convinced that your project is going to be useful to them, they may not elect to bring you there as opposed to other people. So you might, for instance, research the priorities of the country. Does this tie in with work that's already been going on there, things that the government has supported, current debates that are occurring, current policies that are being considered? You want to really show them that this is important work. In terms of feasibility, as I said before, it's not only the feasibility of the project itself. Can it be done in 9 to 10 months? Are the resources available? Is it realistic? But also, is it feasible that you can carry out the project? And these are the key words to keep in mind with the statement of grant purpose. You have to be as convincing as you can about these 2 points. Now, this third point here, while the statement should be well written, it can be straightforward. So this is not a personal statement. It's a grant proposal. You are writing for a general audience because typically there may not be people reviewing your application at any point who are experts in your discipline. Usually the national screening committees that review the applications first in the US are country specific, not discipline specific. So they'll know a lot about the country to which you're applying, but they won't necessarily know much about the field to which you're applying. Now, that does vary again in some cases, and there are some fields outside of the arts categories where the national screening committees are discipline specific. For instance, I believe science proposals are usually reviewed by discipline specific groups, but you don't want to get too heavy on the jargon. You want to make sure that a general educated audience could understand what you're proposing to do. So, fundamentally, you are seeking funding to support a project, so be specific and be clear as you compose the statement of grant purpose. Now, related to this, be mindful that you want to reach and convince two audiences. So you want to convince this national screening committee. You also want to convince the readers in the host country, and assume they're going to be skeptical. Assume that they're going to be doubting you. Remember that this is competitive, and so there will be other applications that they will be reading. And so you want to make sure it's clear why your project is especially important, why your project kind of needs to be funded, and why it's an interesting, innovative piece of work. Now, another point here is you do, of course, want to place your project in an intellectual context. You can cite some references, but you should not take up time with a lit review because you won't have the space to do it. If you're not actually talking about your methodology until a page and a half in, that's a huge problem. They're going to be they're going to be very interested in how you're going to do this. So they want to know what your project is, why it's important, but then how you're going to carry it out. How is the project actually going to work? What is your 9 to 10 months in the country going to look like? So, I think when you're explaining why the project is important, you may need to cite references. Perhaps you're building off past work. Perhaps you can refer to someone who is calling for the kind of research that you want to propose. Perhaps you reference government documents, but you should not have anything like a standard lit review. Now, another point is to show a real need for this to occur in the proposed country. What this means is that you want to show how your project fits into the country itself. So you want to propose something that's realistic given what it's like to live and work in the country. If language requirements are really important, you want to make sure that you've got the language proficiency needed to carry out what you're proposing to do. As you're proposing the project, try to show them that you know something about the country, that you have some understanding of how this work is going to relate to them. More ideas. Refer to the resources you're going to have in the host country or institution. If you're going to have letters of affiliation, you can reference those letters as so-and-so discusses in his or her letter of affiliation. I will have access to X. Methodology. This says explain a day in the life. What are you going to do every day? What is your 9 to 10 months going to look like? If you are proposing to do something that involves human subjects, you should indicate that you will be getting the clearance to conduct the research through Notre Dame. And there are websites here to guide you in that process. CUSE can help you with that as well. You also want to make sure your project's of an appropriate scope. Don't propose something that's going to take 2 years. Also, don't propose something that would take 3 months. Really give them a timeline. Show them how you're going to break up the 9 to 10 months in a realistic way. Can you do 1,000 interviews in 3 months? Probably not. So make sure that it's realistic. And these are areas where your research mentors should be able to help you. People in your field should be able to give you a pretty good sense of this. And it's okay to talk about what you're going to do before you go there. If this is connected to a senior thesis, talk about that. If you're going to spend the year in between your application and when you'd actually go, doing additional research, indicate that. Personal preparation, again, this is just showing them that you can carry out the project, keep a sharp focus, make sure that you got a clear research question, you've got good methodology. This does have to be a strong research proposal. And then get to the point. This is perhaps the fundamental thing. Tell them what you're going to do, why you're going to do it, where you're going to do it, the standard W questions. So give them a very clear sense of your proposal. Now, the letter of affiliation. For most countries, it is essential that you secure an affiliation within the host country. This is often the most time-consuming part, in the sense that it can take the longest time to set this up. So this is something you should really be working on now if you haven't started working on it already. Now, you will want to provide them ultimately with an acceptance letter if you're planning to enroll in courses and you have this letter before the application deadline, a letter of invitation, a letter of support, things that contribute to why your project is compelling and feasible from the perspective of people in the country. They should indicate that they're willing to work with you. The letters of affiliation are not confidential. You will upload them yourself. So you may even want to work with these individuals on the letter of affiliation. Indicate to them that it's helpful to offer details about the kind of resources they have, about how useful it would be to have you there conducting certain kinds of research. The letter of affiliation is very important in demonstrating especially feasibility. So you want to be working on this right away. Sometimes people will find affiliations through connections they already have. They may have already done research or studied somewhere. Sometimes the affiliations will come from people who know people. So maybe you work with an advisor at Notre Dame who knows someone in a country who is doing certain kinds of work. But I also know that people have secured affiliations just by contacting people with whom they want to work in particular countries. That can work well too, but that also typically takes the longest because usually you want to kind of build a rapport with the person, have enough time to talk with them about what you're proposing to do there. So this will enable them to write a stronger letter of affiliation. Now, the personal statement. This is a little bit more open than the statement of grant purpose. They call it a miniature autobiography. They really want to see your academic and personal development and how the Fulbright fits into all of this. So you can talk about key experiences in your life that have put you on a path toward a Fulbright by emphasizing your maturity and cultural adaptability. So you might reference international experiences you've already had, certain experiences you've had that indicate your commitment to a certain field of study, to a certain country. Excuse me, and give them a sense of how this fits into your long-term goals. Ideally, the Fulbright will be something that will contribute to your trajectory, not something that you will do and then completely forget about. Give them a sense that this is going to make a difference to you, that it's a natural next step for you, and that it's going to contribute much to the next phase of your life. Now, you will also need 3 professional referees. And note these bullet points here. This is what they're expecting to see in these 3 letters. Feasibility, again, your ability, your linguistic prep, your ability to adapt, and any other factors that have a bearing on your proposed experience abroad. You want them to confirm that your project's compelling and feasible, confirm that you'd represent the US well overseas. Essentially, they are confirming and expanding upon things that come up in your application. So if you're saying that you have certain kinds of skills, it's useful if a letter writer can confirm that. You might think of these letters as really being letters of support for your project. And for your ability to carry out the project. These Fulbright letters should be very focused on that. They can talk about your adaptability, they can talk about your character, and they're not only recommending you, they're recommending a project. And so these letters, typically letters that have been written for other applications, will not help here, because the letters really need to be focused on what you're proposing to do. So be sure that they know what you're proposing to do. Be sure that they've seen a draft of your proposal, and ideally they should be helping you to construct the proposal, but be sure that they know what you have in mind. Be sure that they know what the plan is so that they can best comment on your specific plan. The final major point here is that you might also need a language evaluation. If you're proposing a project that requires the use of a language, if the host country requires certain language proficiency, or even if that's not the case, if you know something of the language in a host country, you should get a foreign language evaluation from a college-level language instructor. This is similar to the Fulbright recommendation system. You will ultimately submit their information online, and they will go online and complete a form indicating your language ability. You may want to set this up even now, even if they don't do the evaluation till later. It can be somebody who's taught you, so you may not need to sit down and do a formal evaluation, but you might have to. So start looking into this now. If you have questions about this, of course, let us know. Finally, of course, you will need transcripts, and if you are an art applicant, you will need a portfolio, and information about that is available here. Ultimately, the portfolio is part of confirming that you have the ability to carry out what you're proposing to do. If you are proposing a certain kind of skill in art already, you want to convince them, you want to show them that you actually have that skill. Arts applications will be reviewed by artists, and so it's important that you have other artists, preferably people you work with at Notre Dame, review this material so that they can give you an assessment of whether they think it's an effective portfolio. Now, that's the advice document. Let's now look at some sample applications. Let me close this out and we will do that. Let's start with a biology application to France. There we go. So now I'm going to try to give you a few applications from a few different fields so you can see what they would look like. This application to France is, again, in biology, and this is a pretty straightforward one because this person is going to obtain a research-based master's degree in France. That's the idea here. And so this is very much about explaining what that thesis research for the master's is going to look like. So look at the abstract. It's very straightforward about what the person is going to do and why it's important. The first sentence is the what and the where, and the second is the why. It's essentially a boiled down version of the statement of grand purpose, a kind of elevator speech about what this person is proposing to do. Then for host country engagement, again, a very specific plan that shows that the person has given some thought to this and they've already started to really confirm a volunteer opportunity. So if you can kind of explain a realistic civic engagement proposal, even here, that will usually strengthen your application because it shows that you've done your research. This is something you really care about doing. It's something ideally that connects to what you already have done. Then they will ask for your plans upon return to the US, and part of what they're doing here is to make sure that what you're proposing is worthwhile. This person wants to do an MD PhD, so of course biology-related research would be useful here. Now, let's take a look at the statement of grand purpose. And you may want to pause this and kind of read it over, but what we have here is a pretty straightforward description of what the person is planning to do. So the first paragraph is basically a summary of what the person is going to do, why the person wants to be there. And then we immediately get into some context. This is sort of the why this is a compelling project. So it's explaining why this particular factor is important. But then it gets into explaining the problem here, and then this gets into explaining why this particular lab is the place to address this problem. I'll give you a chance to kind of look this over. You can pause it, of course. So at the bottom here, you'll see that the person is again now having given some context, having explained why this is an important topic. Now they're confirming that this is really the place it needs to be done. So much of this is the compelling part. Why this is an important project and why it has to be done there. Now, we have some information here about qualifications. The person has been there before. They have done this work already. Now you'll note that there could be more detail here about the person's qualifications, but in this case the person actually didn't need it, and we'll see why in a moment. But this is essentially the how. This is how the person is qualified to do this. Now this last section here, or next to last paragraph, is about civic engagement. Here we have, and note that this takes up half a page in this 2-page proposal, what the person's going to do to engage in the host country. And again, we have very specific ideas here, and they connect to things that the person has already done. And they connect to the Fulbright mission of promoting cultural exchange. This person has interacted with people during their previous internship in France, and note this point. It was clear to me they had a lot of different perspectives to share to me from different backgrounds, perspectives, and experiences. So this is somebody who has already done civic engagement and is proposing essentially to continue doing something similar in the host country. And then in the last paragraph here, this is how this connects to the person's future. And we get a little bit of qualifications here. So the key is that this person has clearly explained what the plan is, why this is an important thing to study, why they are in the best place to study it, and then what they're going to do beyond the lab. Now let's look at the affiliation letter. And I want to show you this because this is an excellent letter of affiliation. And basically that is the case because this person is confirming that the Fulbright applicant will make a major contribution to their work. So we do get, this person themselves gives some context about why this is compelling work, and that's actually quite useful. And then, of course, you can pause this, but note here that there's a lot of work being done here to confirm the importance of this work. So this really complements the statement of grand purpose very well. And then here, I am convinced that this person will be able to contribute significantly in this field. I've seen the person working, I'm impressed, and this person has a pleasant personality and interacts well with others. So what we have here is a letter that not only helps confirm why the project is compelling, but also says that this person will be able to do it. This is pretty much all you can hope for from a letter of affiliation. Um, you have someone in the host country really confirming that they'd love to have this person there. So this is what a letter of affiliation can be, and ideally you would be able to get one somewhat like this. Now let's look at another example. Let's look at an example from in international relations connected to the European Union. So there are grants available to the European Union as a whole where you propose a project that involves multiple countries in the EU. Let's look at the abstract. I propose to research this. Boom. And why? Well, it's a way to explore defense cooperation, multilateral institutions, and human rights efforts in Europe. Spent 9 months conducting interviews. So again, the project is boiled down in this abstract. Host country engagement. Here are some things the person is going to do in the EU. They talk about they have the most experience with Brussels, so they're familiar with places to work there, and they indicate that they will do similar things in these other countries. That's fine at this point. The key is that they're giving a sense of what they're going to do initially, and that they will be able to look into other engagement opportunities as they learn more. But they're probably going to center around perhaps work with women in women's shelters, and also perhaps tutoring specifically in those kinds of situations. Plans upon return to the U.S., again, very straightforward. Now, let's look at the statement of grant purpose. We start off immediately with some context, which helps to explain why this is important. This resolution has been passed. And this proposal is going to research the inclusion of gender and security policies within the 3 main organizations in Europe. So right here, clear reason why this is important, clear description of what the person's proposing to do. We get a little bit of additional context, which just confirms again why this is timely work. And then we get some how. In my Fulbright research, I will study this. I'm going to focus on 2 key themes. I will look at qualitative and quantitative results. As we go on further down, we get some of a timeline. The plan is from October through December to be in Belgium, from January to March to be in the UK. The final 3 months will be in Sweden. So a lot of this here on the second page is the how. Who the person is going to be talking to, what they're planning to do. And note, you will see that this person has letters of affiliation from these key figures in these different countries. So this will confirm that this person's really going to be able to work with these people. You can't just sort of propose that you're going to work with certain people. You need them to confirm it so that the reviewers are convinced that you're really going to do this. You can, of course, pause and look at this more on your own. Note that the last paragraph here is essentially a conclusion that drives home what the person's going to do and why this is important work. So what's most important, again, is explaining why this work needs to be done, why it's important that it be done in a particular country, or in this case, countries, and how you're going to go about doing it. You have to say enough to show that you have a plan. Now, this person actually had a number of letters of affiliation, and we may not go through them all here, but this is a full page explaining that this group, they're very impressed by someone's research project. They have been contacted, they have interviewed the person already, they've gotten recommendation letters on the person's behalf, and this is how specifically the person's going to be integrated. This is, again, an excellent letter of affiliation, because it's not only saying that they'll work with the person, but that they're excited to have the person there. This is a very convincing kind of letter. And this person had multiple letters like this that aligned with the places the person was proposing to work. Now, we will end it here. I do want to note that there are sample applications on file in the CUSE offices in 110 Brownson on the Notre Dame campus. You can come check those out in the office, review them in the office. You can do that at basically any time that we are open, which is usually Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5. Also, some of these will be made available online, and you will be given information about that if you have gone through the screening application process. You can also find examples of proposals online if you do internet searches. That can sometimes be useful. But I do want to confirm that it's important that you really make a compelling and feasible case, or a case that your proposal, rather, is compelling and feasible. They will scrutinize these. This is competitive, and if there's doubt that you're going to be able to do what you propose to do, if it seems too far beyond what you've already done, if it seems like you are proposing to do something that would be very difficult to do, practically speaking, then that's going to be problematic. You really need to be able to convince the reviewers that this is something that can be done and that it's something that's important. So as you're going through this process, think carefully about what your idea is, why it's compelling. Make sure that you can make a good case to yourself, so that you will then be able to make a good case to the reviewers. Please let me know if you have any questions. You can contact me at fellows@nd.edu, and we look forward to working with you on the Fulbright Study Research Grant application. Take care.